Everyone, Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles, back with another great event. I am really honored to be hosting Greg Sargent today. Greg, welcome. It's great you're here.
Thanks for having me on, Simon. Always a pleasure, man.
Well, listen, you usually interview me in our relationship. I had this happen with Ron Brownstein recently, where I interviewed Ron after 30 years of him interviewing me. You often are the one calling me with questions, so it's an honor to turn the tables on you today. And I've asked you to come on and spend some time with our community because you've been writing for months, but also particularly in the last few weeks, about this kind of maniacal focus that the administration has on creating some kind of oppressive domestic police force. And it's happening through a variety of ways. But you had broke a story last week with the New Republic that I'd like you to perhaps bring our listeners and our watchers up to speed on a little bit.
Sure. Well, we obtained an internal Department of Homeland Security memo, which essentially outlined that DHS top officials are really hoping for the military to take a much more active role in domestic law enforcement than they have already. I want to just sort of preface this all by saying people need to get to know who Phil Hegseth is. And yes, he is Hegseth, the defense secretary's younger brother. And he happens to also be a senior advisor to DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, and he's the liaison for DHS to the Pentagon. And he's quite a character. He's real MAGA, very extreme, and he wrote this memo that we obtained, which essentially said it was preparation for an upcoming meeting, a then upcoming meeting with Pentagon top officials, including the defense secretary and CENTCOM people and stuff like that, in which he was saying we need to persuade the military leadership to take a more active role. They're not grasping the nature of the threat to the homeland the way the president does. And that's pretty extraordinary for a Homeland Security official to put in writing that they actively and affirmatively want the Pentagon to take their duties to defend the homeland more seriously, by which they mean with operations like the one in Los Angeles. And in fact, at one point, the memo actually says one thing we've got to talk about with these Pentagon officials is that the operation in Los Angeles is going to be the first of many for years to come. I think that lays out what you're talking about, Simon, which is that they really, really, really envision not just a sort of piecemeal thing. You know, Trump tweets about troops in LA here, he tweets about DC there. Something much more sustained is what we're looking at. And there it is in writing.
Well, and I think there are a couple pieces to this that I just want to walk everybody through, right? We first have their commitment to deport 10 to 15 million people out of the country, of which, as you have written and others have written, if they arrest and detain 3,000 people a day, that's a million people a year. That means to do 10 to 15 million, that's 10 years of this kind of sustained activity that we're seeing and this level of funding to ICE, this extraordinary expansion of ICE. We also had reporting in the last few days that the FBI is now reimagining itself as a domestic national police force focused on violent crime and not on the traditional things that the FBI has focused on in the division of labor between the FBI, non-uniformed, and the uniformed police in the United States, who have been a state and local responsibility. And we also know now that we've seen this sort of unprecedented deployment of multiple National Guard in DC, not just the National Guard in DC and not just ATF and DEA, but now we're seeing people as a DC resident, the notion that there are people coming in here from West Virginia to sort of keep the peace and to create public safety who don't know the region, don't know the town, don't know the ways of our city. There's a reason why police have been a local responsibility, right, for a long time. And so you have now all of these separate efforts all playing into sort of this idea that Trump is deeply committed to a massive funded, right? I mean, ICE is going to have more money than the Russian military, massively funded, integrated at some point through DHS, series of federal agencies, departments, to oppress, to protect the public safety, whatever it is that that day that they determine to be the need. But the ambition behind this is incredible.
It really is. I want to point to a core contradiction that's sort of embedded in all this that still eludes a lot of people's attention. And Simon, you and I have talked about this in our endless chats, which I cherish very much. I want your listenership and followers to know that. I learn a lot from Simon. Let me tell you, like I've learned enormous amounts over the years. So thank
back
you, Simon.
back at you, brother.
Appreciate it. Well, so it was recently reported, and it's been reported in a few places actually, that Stephen Miller recently convened the top ICE officials and essentially berated them, saying, "You're falling well short of the deportation arrests that we want." You mentioned numbers a little earlier, 3,000 a day is the target. That adds up to around a million a year. But what also has been reported is that as part of that, Stephen Miller is redirecting huge amounts of federal law enforcement resources into deportations. And I have talked to experts about this, including ICE experts, previous people who worked at ICE at high levels, who told me that what this really means is you're shifting law enforcement resources away from serious crimes like child kidnapping, drug trafficking, that kind of thing, and into deportations sort of inevitably if you're going to do what Stephen Miller wants you to do. Now, I almost feel, Simon, that we concede too much to Trump when we say things like he wants to fight crime. That's not what he wants to fight. He wants to fight Americans and he wants to deport as many people as possible. And one thing I simply cannot fathom, and maybe you can help me on this one, Simon, is why won't more Democrats say that Stephen Miller is channeling law enforcement resources away from the things they care about, like child trafficking, that type of thing, and toward the removal of grandmothers and carpenters? This is a ready-made argument for Democrats to make, and they won't make it.
Yeah, look, I think we're in a new place on this over the last few weeks, right? The occupation of DC, sort of the outrageous, wild, over the top, and also the lack of any integrity of any of the arguments and the justification, right? I mean, the
Yes.
whole justification is him declaring an emergency in DC because crime rates are going up and they're actually going down, right? And so this is like the tariffs and other fake emergencies. He's using political powers that are imagined in his head that he has, based on false narratives and fictions that he's portraying. So, we are going to have in the country, we are about to have a very, very big conversation about all of this. We need Democrats. It's been our position at Hopium that it should be a clear position of all Democrats that we oppose the creation of a private political police force in the United States that's loyal to Trump and not to the Constitution. And that should be kind of a no-brainer, right? And because it's actually
Yes.
happening now, not just in one way, right? Like they're coming at this now as part of what is important about this conversation is they're coming at this domestic political police force through a variety of means. It's not just a single, it's now no longer just the blowing up of ICE. It's what's happening with FBI, it's what's happening with the National Guard, now states participating in this. And so it is worrisome that there seems that creating this sort of oppressive domestic political police force, which has been obviously something that America has avoided since our earliest days, right? The whole way that the Constitution and our founders sort of understood the dangers of these kinds of things, which is why law enforcement has been a local and state responsibility, that this is becoming grave now, right? And I think that this falls, I'll just say, Greg, this falls into something we talk about at Hopium, which is the sort of the curse of American exceptionalism, which is that we always believe that those things cannot happen here, right? That he would never implement these crazy tariffs that would raise prices, right? That he would never really try to deport 10 to 15 million people who are working and living among us, that he would never sell out the country to Russia, or that he would never build a domestic, police force, arguably the most vicious and largest ever assembled per capita in modern history, but he is. And the question, as you raised, is what are we going to do about it? Those in the pro-democracy movement, this clearly has to become central to what we do when we get back here in September.
I really like the way you framed it. It should be a no-brainer position for Democrats to adopt. I will say that, so we reported at the New Republic, where I'm a staff writer, this internal memo from DHS that outlined all those plans that I mentioned earlier. We talked to Representative Adam Smith, who is the ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee and a very senior Democrat in Congress in Washington, somebody that is widely respected within the Democratic caucus. And he wrote a letter to the Defense Secretary saying, please reveal any and all memos that are being done and any and all plans that are being done pursuant to DHS's desire for you to get much more involved in domestic law enforcement. Now, I was a little appalled to see that very few Democrats joined him on that. And in an interview with me, Representative Smith put the matter as starkly as you did. He said, in effect, it's highly alarming that the president is merging the Homeland Security Department and the Pentagon to essentially create his own private political police force, his own squad, as it is. And it's a little surprising to me that that's a hard position for Democrats to articulate. But it is true, as you say, that people are coming back. We all know Washington loves its August vacation, and so hopefully change a little bit
Except
in
Trump, right?
September.
If Trump is now reminding us that he's not from here because he's working late into late August, here.
Right.
And but Greg,
But it's a
I
good
think,
argument, you say, Simon. You articulated a good frame for Democrats to start from. That can be their beginning point. If Democrats can't say that, then what can they say?
well, and I think that I think a couple of things. One is that this is also happening the way that things work in Washington, right? Is that you're on the Homeland Security Committee, and you are on the this other
Yeah.
committee, and that what's happening is there, and so people don't necessarily have the whole picture of what's happening here. And also it is the depths of August, and this has been a rapid escalation in the last week. But Congress is going to be coming back next week to an occupied city, and they're going to have to make judge. There's going to this is going to be really in front of us. I mean, the whole one of the most you're one of the most interesting things that's about to happen is that will in the budget, how does all of this stuff manifest in the budget debate that's coming up, where Republicans need to pass a budget? Are Democrats going to be able to use the budget and negotiations process to knock out and disable some of this stuff to make sure it doesn't happen? We know that they may ignore that anyway and just do whatever they want because Trump believes, as Tom Homan said last week, that there are no limits to what Trump can do to protect the homeland, right? That he has said there are no limits, meaning that he can act extrajudicially without constitutional authority, without legal authority, right? They have asserted this power that he has literally unlimited powers when it comes to protecting the homeland, right? And I think that Democrats are really going to, we need to really seize this as an opportunity to make clear to the American people that we are going to fight with everything we got for their freedoms and their rights. And it's this is going to be showtime, I think, when we get back here next week.
And by the way, I just want to underscore again that when Tom Homan says that, he's not actually interested in protecting the homeland. Like, that's a made up thing. It's a fiction, as you put it. And the pretextual nature of all this, I think, eludes people in a significant way. And because Democrats tend to feel like they can't win arguments about things like immigration and crime, they feel a little hamstrung or a little, held back from making that type of argument, which is not just, hey, Trump is making stuff up, here's what the stats in DC show, which is a limited argument, but also that Trump is using manufactured pretexts for massive abuses of power, which are escalating and which will target you. That's the second piece that I think has to be said. And it's for some reason something I think a lot of Democrats are unwilling to do. There's sort of you probably know this better than I do, Simon, but sort of in DC consultant brainlock world, there's this sort of sense that if you're talking about Trump as a threat, you're kind of trapped. There's a sort of weird mind meld that goes on between Democratic electeds and Democratic consultants, in which they sort of agree to say we've got to be careful not to let Trump draw us to debates about certain things, about crime and immigration. And it's half, right? It just ends up taking away from Democrats. It's valuable about your site and your community, frankly, Simon. You're trying to push through that.
Well, and I think, and by the way, we're having a little bit of connection issues just on your end. Just be aware of that. Is that I think it all came through okay. I will say this, Greg, about what you just said is that we are talking today, and Zelensky and Trump will be meeting soon, within an hour of this when we're recording this conversation, and we are watching the President of the United States right now, the leader of the country, as I call him, because I don't think he aspires to be a president, and I don't think we should call him that any longer, is that he's about to sell out the West, Europe, the United States to Putin, right? He signaled it last night and overnight this morning. And I think we have a huge opportunity to really redefine him and about being weak and not strong and failing and not succeeding. Because I think a lot of what's happening right now, this kind of late August, frenetic, maniacal kind of throwing shit against the wall that we've seen from Trump, the wild escalation on the tariffs just 2 weeks ago, which are going to be bad for the country. He's did the occupation DC out of kind of like nowhere, right? It's like boom, it just all happened. They've continued to escalate. He's now had this wild, he's calling in European leaders, to Washington. All of Europe shuts down in August. This town shuts down in August, right? But here we are now, with a week left of recess. He hasn't taken any time off, right? He's working all the time. He's pulling into or 2 weeks to recess, I'm sorry, all of our attention. He's dominating the national global news, right? He's the center of everything, which is what he wants in this kind of completely pathetic and sick and crazy way that he operates. And where we are now is that I think what's happening, the dynamic that we're in, is that he is aware that he's unpopular. He had the worst poll of his presidency last week. He's aware that the economic strategy is failing. He's feeling his powers ebb. And because of that, he's needing to do more extreme things to restore this sense of power and strength and manhood that is so central to the strongman positioning. And so, because of his failure, because of his unpopularity, because he is a big blubbery baby man, as I call him, and he's also aging and he's not physically well, he's not walking well, that he's feeling his powers ebb. And therefore, in a sort of classic strongman nature, he is escalating in the powers that he has, becoming more fantastical about the arguments that are further and further away from reality. And I think we're gonna go through what could be now, and I think where it's manifesting and where it's becoming really dangerous is in the stuff that you've been writing about.
I'd like to add something to what you said, because it goes back to my initial thought about Dem consultants and Dem elected officials. There's a which kind of runs as follows. There's this sort of sense, as I said, in Dem world, that if you get drawn into a debate or as mass deportations or as authoritarian threats or as trap, he's just trying to trick Democrats into playing his game. But to your point, his game is actually aimed at his base. It's not aimed at Democrats. It's not something Democrats have to take seriously at all as a problem for them. As you say, right? His base has this sort of impression of him as this strongman figure who never loses, who is all powerful, who's all knowing, who wields absolute mastery of events. And when things start to get away from him, it's those people he's got to persuade that he's in control of stuff and that he's powerful and strong and all the rest of it. And that's when you see kind of this amped up effort to do things like send troops into DC or LA. It has coincided, as you say, with the dip in his poll numbers and the softening in his base. And so I think Democrats should really be mindful of that they're not getting trapped into any debate. They're only talking themselves out of going after Trump's real Achilles heel, something you've talked a lot about, especially with his base. They should be poking as hard as possible at Trump's fundamental weakness, the absurdity to persuade us that he's ruling as a fascist dictator. Like there's a lot of games, don't you think, Simon? He wants us to say to ourselves, "Oh my God, politics is hopeless. They've won. It's over." And
Well,
then
and
we
Greg,
equalize.
yeah,
He wants that, and so Democrats have to be mindful.
look, the other curse I mentioned is the curse of kitchen table issues, right? Where we're told that we can't talk about all these other things, and therefore, since we don't talk about them, we don't actually learn how to mount arguments against them, right? So the lack of investment in talking about them means that we actually aren't very good at it, and we haven't, gone through it and mastered it. And look, I think that one of the other things I wrote about Greg the last few days is that as part of the sense that his powers have ebbed, is that I think that he is losing the power to persuade. And he is in negative territory on every issue with the exception of border security, which has now become largely irrelevant in our domestic discourse. And every time a new event happens, they believe, I think, that this is going to be the thing that restores his strength and power. And with the public, not just his base, but with the broader public too. I think they were shocked that the Iran bombing didn't actually juice his numbers like virtually every other military action is done in modern times in the United States. I think they were shocked that the country turned on them so quickly with the Los
Yeah,
Angeles escalation. And I think
yes.
yeah, and I think that this is also going to turn against him because basically, we're at a point now where very close to 55% of the country has sort of basically written him off and is not going to give him any, is not giving him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, on the tariffs, he's down in the 30s. On the big ugly bill, he's down in the 30s now. And so he's having a problem, as you point out, his need to sustain the base and the fiction of his Superman status is pushing him further and further away from the broader electorate. And he's growing more distant to them, particularly as prices rise, the economy slows, and the deficit explodes, and all the things that are happening. And I think it's this dual dynamic that is really important to understand that his escalation is due to his weakness, not his strength. And we need to say it. And by the way, the person who has said this more effectively than anyone in recent times, the Democrats, has been Gavin Newsom over the last couple of weeks. He is pounding on the weakness of the Trump brand, and he's been hitting on it really hard. And it's, I think, exactly where we have to go. We have to have be in the battlefield of traditional issues and the economy and Medicaid and all those things. But then there's this other battlefield that we have to participate on, the battlefield that he spends most of his time on, which is strong versus weak, winning versus losing, succeeding, failing, hero, villains, right? We have to develop a comprehensive strategy in the Democratic Party to contest that space and win in that space the way that we are very adept, I think, at sort of engaging in traditional issues.
Well, I want to underscore something about that as well. There's not a contradiction between, on the one hand, mercilessly ridiculing Trump for his buffoonishness, his kind of watch me play fascist on DC Putin routine, you know what I mean? On the one hand, and on the other hand, pointing out that what he's doing actually does constitute massive and very dangerous abuses of power. Democrats can make both those points at the same time, and they have to make them. They have to say that, as you point out, that everything is born of Trump's fundamental weakness, his failure. He's a failing, buffoonish president, right? A joke of a figure, a diminished figure. They can say that and also say, when he sends the National Guard into DC, it's some dangerous shit and we got to take it very seriously. Simon, I want to flag one number from the Pew poll, which has eluded a lot of people's attention. There was a new Pew poll just a few days ago. It had Trump's approval in the 30s, general approval, but critically, it had only 44% of Americans saying that they're confident in Trump's ability to effectively handle law enforcement. 56% of Americans are not confident in his ability to handle law enforcement. That's a stunning number. It's in that 55% essentially giving up on Trump ballpark that you suggested earlier. But it really goes to the core of what we're seeing. We're seeing a poll like this is taken at the very moment when cities are being occupied by federal law enforcement and by the National Guards and stuff. And so there's a very broad sense among the public, if this Pew poll is right, that he's just fucking it up entirely with law enforcement. And it's all just a real mess. He doesn't have any idea what he's doing.
No, it's impulsive, and as people like Ann Applebaum and others remind us all the time, there is no strategy, right? I mean, there's just impulsivity, there's reaction, tactical, there, and he gets up and he feels inadequate that day, and he's got to do something to make him feel better and to feel strong and powerful. And this sort of ongoing show that we all are subject to every day of, I joke that it's like a version of where are you, my mother, right? Every day he's running around wondering whether this is the thing that's going to make him strong and virile again, because he's not feeling it anymore. And we're all subject to this awful television show that none of us want to watch, right? It's a version of Are You My Mother, him running around pathetically every day trying to feel strong. Greg, thank you. I just want to say, listen, you and I could talk for 3 hours. We do most weeks anyway. And I want to let you go, but just remind people about how they can stay in touch. Greg has been writing so intelligently about these basket of issues that we discussed today. And I'm wondering, Greg, if you can just remind people about how to find you, how to read you, how to stay in touch with all of your great reporting.
Well, thanks for the overly complimentary words, Simon. I appreciate it, especially coming from you. I'm a staff writer at the New Republic. I'm on Twitter and on Blue Sky. And we have a blog, a daily blog, and a daily podcast as well called The Daily Blast. It's the New Republic's central podcast. I host it every day. It's short and it's sweet, and we get right to the point with great guests just about every day. We have Joyce White Vance just today, who was absolutely terrific. And we're in and out real quick, no small talk, we promise. We won't take up much of your day. It's the Daily Blast at the New Republic, and that's our podcast. And so that's where you can find us daily. Simon, thanks so much, man.
Thanks, everybody. Greg, keep fighting. And here we are. I'm reporting to you from occupied Washington, D.C. See you, everybody.